Welcome to Pineland Underground, the official podcast of the United States Army's John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, and the best podcast the military has to offer.
Real, bold, and unrestricted.
We're your hosts, Sergeant Major Chuck Ritter,
Major Bobby Tuttle. Welcome to Pineland Underground.
All right, welcome back to Pineland Underground. For this episode, we have two special guests in the studio. First, we have Major General Patrick Roberson, Commander of the United States Army Special Warfare Center and School, but only for a few more days, right, sir?
That's right.
All right.
11 August.
And then he's going to be moving up to the United States Army Special Operations Command. He served in the Army for 32 years. He served as a battalion commander in 10th Special Forces Group, as a group commander in the 3rd Special Forces Group. He's held numerous staff and deputy commanding positions, as well as deployed on a slew of combat rotations, which culminating in him commanding the Special Operations Task Force in Iraq from 2018 to 2019, where he was responsible for leading the fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Second, we have Chief Warrant Officer 5, Stephen Frazier. He's the outgoing Special Warfare Center and School's Chief Warrant Officer. He's about to retire. Is that correct, Chief?
A few more months.
And how many years have you having right now?
This month was 34.
Ooh, 34 years. Chief Frazier served most of his time in the 10th Special Forces Group. He has a massive number of deployments under his belt across Europe, Africa, as well as combat deployments to the Middle East. He also has the distinction of having the privilege and honor of wearing the Army's Rsop badge, which me and him share in common. So unfortunately for General Roberson and Major Tuttle, they don't know what it means to wear such a prestigious qualification. But I'm quite sure that Bobby's going to remind us at least twice during this episode that he's a combat diver.
Dive soup.
Dive soup. See, there he goes.
All right.
Thanks,
All right, so with that, over to you, Bobby.
Yeah, so gentlemen, really excited to have you on the show today.
Sure.
And again, this episode will wrap up your time over the past 2 and 3 years in really that driver's seat or the captain's seat of the helm of the Special Warfare Center and School. Now, Chief Frazier, I really appreciate your comments during your change of responsibility just this last week. I know the two of you gentlemen have worked together extensively in a professional setting, but also are close friends, family friends, and your wives are also very close as well, which I know makes a good work environment. So I just want to say that's very impressive to see you two at that level, having worked together for so long.
I don't know if you knew this, but we were on the same ODA together.
I did hear about that.
Yeah, in the mid-'90s.
Did you ever think that you would be at this 2-star general officer level?
I thought
back
Chris
at
would
Swick?
be for sure.
Yes.
Destined for greatness.
Not in a million. Yeah, 96 to 98.
Yep. One deployment to Northern Iraq, one deployment to Bosnia together. Chris had to go to, was it ALC? You missed another deployment during that time, but it was for school.
Back then it was ANOC,
ANOC.
Old
known
ANOC.
as SLC today.
95. I was still in high school.
Yeah, I was in middle school, I think. Chief Frazier mentioned 34 years in the service. I'm 37. So.
Well, those are actually those are really good deployments. Both of those were. Chris missed the one that was probably the least meaningful. The two that we were on together were fabulous. We had to evacuate Northern Iraq. We were the only ODA in Northern Iraq, making sure that Saddam did not invade into Northern Iraq, and then he did, so we had to leave. 96.
Holy smokes. I like that. Well, gentlemen, so I want to kind of start big picture for our episode today. Bigger picture, and then we'll kind of narrow down a little bit more of the Special Warfare Center and School. But I was hoping you both could chime in a little bit about what is Rsop, and then how does the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, or what we know as Swick, how does Swick fit into the greater Rsop enterprise?
Well, I think the way that we like to describe it is we are the generating force for the operational force, which is, first SFC. I think we get a lot of our terminology also, I would say, from Training and Doctrine Command and Forces Command, because that's kind of the equivalent in the Army. So I think when you're looking for things to say, like, what are you like? In a way, SWCS is like TRADOC and ForceCom is like first SFC. If you want just on an equivalency piece, it's easy for military people to at least get their arms around that. So we're actually assessing, civil affairs, psychological operations, special forces, officers, and NCOs, assessing them, selecting them, and bringing them in, training them, and then we're going to send them back out to the operational force. Maybe they're going to come back again and get enhancing training. That's another piece to what we're doing. I think, other things, we're writing doctrine. We're the proponency piece, which is often misunderstood by people, is really how do you manage a branch, because these branches don't just manage themselves or happen. You have to figure out how many E6s do I need, how many officers do I need, how many captains should I assess this year coming in, do I have the grade plates right for in this kind of Christmas tree type description that we look at, a pyramid of growth for officers and NCOs. How many people do we lose every year? Retention, all these kinds of pieces. We're doing a lot of that in conjunction with some others. Some of these things that I mentioned, we have complete control and primacy on. Some we do in conjunction with Human Resources Command and the G1 at 1st SFC and other places. But, a lot of it is we're solely responsible for this. Some of it is we have a share and a stake in what goes on with how we manage our people. But I think there's also an education piece. We talked about the enhancing training, but bringing people back, managing their educations, whether it's NCOs or officers. If CSM Fancher were here, could make his day, he would talk about NCO, education, because officers get a great education. Chris sits on a lot of those boards that picks which officers and NCOs are going to go to our master's degree producing programs. We've got a lot going on, and I think so Bobby was in the SIG, he might have coined this phrase, Swick does a lot that you don't know about. Mm-hmm. So we do a lot. And those are just a few of the tip of the iceberg pieces. Chris, did you want to caveat any of that?
Well, sir, I think I would just add my personal distillation, and I've commented about this before, and that is that, for all the great things that the operational force is and has, it's because of Swick. From finding the individuals that are the prospects to be Rsop soldiers, to giving them their initial training, to coming back for advanced skills training, that happens here, nowhere else. Yes, someone could say that they could attend a school that's a sister service school or something and get some advanced skills, and that's very true. Or you can go to an international partner schooling and get some advanced skills. Very true. But from the United States Army perspective, SOF not only gets their initial beginning type training, but they're getting all their advanced skills, right here. So for all the goodness that the operational force is, it's largely, and I might even argue solely, because of the existence of Swick's mission. And then a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff like the CG was just hitting on too that happened that keep our force, functioning and manageable.
Yeah, I want to add something to this. I think the most important, if I had to think about the priorities, and I know you've heard me talk about this, our number one priority is producing quality, basic RSOF soldiers. But if you think about a business model, from a book, Good to Great,
sure,
Jim Collins, sir. He talks about the most important thing you can do is first get the who, and then you can figure out the what. Well, we get the who, right? Get the right people on the bus. We are getting the right people on the bus for RSOF. If you don't have the right people, you're not going to go too far. And I think that is really, if you think about the most important thing we're doing, we're getting the right people. As Chris said, hey, we're picking the people that, man the operational force. Sounds simple. That is a huge undertaking. We set culture, we do the training, we're doing the selection. So just what's the most important thing you do? That's probably the most important thing that we do.
Yes, sir. We actually had this conversation just earlier today with our language, regional education, and culture department, getting the right people on the bus. But in addition to that is getting the wrong people off the bus. And I think that with the amount of talent that Swick has brought in over the past few years across the board, the staff, the headquarters, the advanced skills, in the NCO Academy, where Sergeant Major Ritter is the deputy, but also just across the board, extremely talented individuals coming to this organization to continue their mission, but also give back to that operational force and the students. You talked about the Swick. We do more than you think we do.
Yeah.
As far as professional military education, branch management, production of the 3 pipelines of Special Forces, Civil Affairs, and PSYOPs, pre-command preparation, advanced skills, furthering education. Swick is that initial touch point with our people and getting them into our regiment across Army Special Operations, but there's so many touch points throughout too for advanced skills, continuing education, and then preparing our leaders for the command as well.
So on this topic real quick, so we talked about getting the right people on the bus.
Yes.
So you go down to the Captain's Career Course or the 18 Alpha Committee. They got knowledge, skills, attributes on the board. In the opinion of both you gentlemen, and without looking at shooing away from what we have on the board, this is RSOF attributes. What do you think the most important 2 attributes are that we're looking for in individuals if they want to be part of civil affairs, psychological operations, or special forces?
Yeah, I think that the one thing that you can be sure of that we're picking in people in our selections, coming out of our selections, is do you have grit? Will you quit or will you not quit? I think that's probably the number one thing that we can assess. I mean, we can also look at the fact that we're looking at, are you a team player? Can you work together on a team under pressure? We're getting a kind of a look there. Your problem-solving ability, right? Can you function alone at night, with the map? Can you figure this out by yourself? Can you do all these things? But to me, that one thing that I'm sure that we're getting is, will you quit when the going gets tough or will you not quit? And at the end, no one quit. that's the one thing. I think there's a few others, and Chris can comment on that also. That's really out of our selections that we're looking for that.
So the thing that comes to my mind, and it's synonymous with what you were just saying about grit, but that is drive. People have to be driven. Because if you're driven, you're not going to quit, like the CG says. If you're driven, you're going to stay curious and be a lifelong learner. If you're driven, you're going to ever be pursuing excellence. It's something else the CG talks a lot about, right, is pursuing excellence. I think we look for people that are driven, and that's grit, as the CG just said.
I'd say like it's almost synonymous with perseverance, because if you got grit, it's almost synonymous with even doing a problem solver. So you've got that grit and that drive that automatically means you're going to find your way around all those problems so you can hit the finish line.
Absolutely. I mean, I love to go down and talk to our guys that run our selection, because they can run down some of the soft truths a little bit with you, or just some of the things that we're looking for, these qualities. They can drive a lot, like, are you lazy or are you not lazy? I'm seeing this. Do you have initiative? Will you help when the people need help? Or are you going to use this opportunity to, take a break by yourself? There's a lot of things we're looking at, and the better eye you get, the more experience you have for that. I think the better you get at it, but I think the big one is the perseverance piece.
Gentlemen, so we understand the mission of the Special Warfare Center and School. Talk about the vision. What's the vision of the organization, and how do we continue moving forward into the future?
Well, what I tell people, when we first got here, it says team of teams on our coin, but I was actually thinking about this a while back, because what we really do is we get the best candidates that America and our Army has to offer. These are the best candidates. We select the best of those, and then we give them the best training that the world has to offer. So I think when you consider that vision, that's what we're trying to do. The best candidates, the best training gives us the best quality product that we can have at the end. That's what I'm looking for. Second Training Group has the motto, quality first.
Quality first.
Yes, and as I've said, that should be all of our mottos, is quality first. Who doesn't want that as their motto? I certainly want that as my motto. So I think everything that we've been about is, hey, how do I get the best product? How do I do it in the most efficient manner? How do I get that product out to our operational force without losing any of that quality in the most expeditious kind of a way? There's lots of other things that kind of go into that, but in the vision, like, we didn't mention one of the other pieces that Swick does, which is look at the operational environment and figure out how do we improve our courses to keep up with, modern warfare or modern technology or anything like that. That is one of the things that we do. I think when we talk about the vision for the future, it should always be, we should be moving at the speed of war, which is one of the things I think we're pretty good at here, actually, as a institution, as a training institution, is to incorporate lessons from the battlefield and get that out to our courses quickly. So these are just some of the visions. But the big one is, hey, we're taking the best people America has, putting them through a selection to get even the better of that best, then we're putting them through the best training that we possibly can.
Yes, sir. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so moving on now. You've been here for 3 years, right, sir?
Yep.
And how long were you here, Chief?
2.
So 2 years. So with what we're trying to achieve in the vision, let's run down the state of the union of Swick right now. You came in right in as I think we're executing optimization right when we were toning down the war in Afghanistan and everything was changing. So how are we looking right now, from your opinions, as Swick as a formation of where we're sitting?
Well, I might be a little biased, but I think we're looking very good. And I can tell you, like, in time, when you have a chance to look back on something, it looks a little bit different than it did at the time when you're facing it, obviously. So when I first took over, and Chief would get here a year later, but when myself and Joe Fancher came in, I would actually articulate that there was a trust gap in a way also, because it wasn't just the optimization piece. There was the whole night letter thing going on, and it was about quality. People had attacked the idea that we produced a quality product. So I think we had to make sure that we could make up for that trust gap and make sure that we could uphold our guarantee, our promise to the operational force, to all of any Rsop soldier, that, hey, we are producing a quality product here. So that was kind of a thing we had to look at, I think, also. The optimization piece itself, great idea, great initiative, because it drives at efficiency, right? Because you're looking at, as Bobby talked about, like, to get better or to become more efficient, it's not just what are you going to do in the future, it's what are you not going to do. So there are things that we had to decide that we weren't going to do, not because they weren't great things, not because they weren't good ideas, it's just that we did not really have the time, in an efficiency sake, after a certain amount of time, you hit a point of diminishing returns, and we've decided really 1 year was our best optimum model. And what are you going to fit in that 1 year for our SF? In this case, it's our SF soldiers. And I think we got that. We've tinkered with it a little bit more on the edges, and it's not perfect. These things are always evolving to what we consider to be the best, but we've got that in a pretty good spot. There were some other pieces on this too. I mean, that was kind of the more pressing thing because that was happening like right away. I think some of the other things that were happening in simultaneity, with that, as the optimization piece was happening, we had noticed, all this attention that we had given the SF pipeline, the Special Forces pipeline, in a way, it sucks all the oxygen out of the room. And there's other entities in the room, CA and SIOP being one of them. And I think we put a huge amount of effort on making our SIOP first. Again, if you think about it as I can't operate completely simultaneously. I have to do some things in order. Next would have been the SIOP pipeline. Like if I've already kind of fixed the SF pipeline and I've got the SIOP pipeline and I'm looking at it, I got to overhaul that thing because that pipeline needed improvement. I don't know if you two know this. That pipeline was about half the length of the SFQ course. Our most intellectually challenging pipeline, like how do I get you to change your mind? How do I influence you? Was half the length of the Special Forces qualification course. So right away, you could figure out, okay, I've got some work to do here. And we did some work. We overhauled a lot of the content. We made it much more academically challenging. We brought in a lot of both business and academic leaders to speak and contribute content to that. And then we added another, special warfare SIOP pipeline piece. And then after that, we attacked the civil affairs pipeline with really a governance portion that I think is super appropriate. And I can talk more about any of those later. But if you just think about attacking those 3 pipelines, we did not rest, and we're still not resting on any of those. We've
been making adjustments, and we did the optimization right off the bat, and then over time we've added more time to some things. We've taken some other time off of other things.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed is, let's take the 18 Alpha course, for example. They came back. I said, hey, sir, here is where we're at. This is where we need to be. And they walked the dog on it. They showed you the data, and you're like, all right. And then you allowed them to add in the fit FTX again and other items to where it's longer than it was when an optimization first started, because it was just a discussion. Said, okay, this is where it needs to be. You've shown me the facts. I get it.
That's right. Well, I'm not one to be totally wed to the plan because I wake up every day and say, hey, there's a new now. Let's check out the new now. And how have my theories that we've put into practice, how are they meeting the real world? And if they're not meeting the real world in the way that we'd intended, we will adjust. No issues.
And I think that each of the pipelines, though, sir, kind of as you mentioned, they're different, and they need to be treated differently.
Yeah.
They're producing a different product with a person that has that grit, is an adaptive problem solver, but they also have other types of skills that they've joined that specific CA, SIOP, or SF pipeline to use and to wield. That attention to detail and that application has to be treated differently as well because they are all different tool sets. And our listeners, as we just released our full spectrum operations podcast episodes for Pineland Underground, our listeners I think can understand that they're all very different.
They are
different.
different.
Work together at different points.
Yeah, and one of the things that we did change, we took a look at the CA and the SIOP selection because we thought, they're only about a decade old. And they're really being modified. We said, hey, is what we want in a civil affairs and SIOP soldier the same thing we want in a special forces soldier? Because maybe we should think about intellectual curiosity, creativity a little bit more on the psychological operations side and the CA side, as opposed to maybe some of the physicality piece. We have changed a little bit of our selection models there. And I'll say, to get to your point, Chuck, about, yes, we're changing things all the time. I would say if we change the SF pipeline maybe by 10%. We did change the SIOP pipeline by about 80%. Mm-hmm. So there's a relativity piece too, where we doubled the length of it. I think we increased the quality by a lot. I mean, I'm pretty happy that we did that. That was a change that needed to happen significantly. I could go on and on about those two other pipelines.
If I could chime in, though, real quick, sir. Again, as you're reflecting,
you
gentlemen both reflecting on kind of the past 3 years, you mentioned the quality of the product that we're producing and the trust that needed to be attended to. What are your feelings as
Yeah.
3 years later, looking back, have we reestablished that trust? And is the quality of product and the feedback we're getting from the operational force exactly what they're looking for?
Well, I can tell you a story. The first week I took over, people would stand up and challenge me, and I'm not talking generals, I'm talking captains, about the quality of the product that we were producing here, in the sense of like, they would say, I don't think you're producing good quality, or you didn't mention quality. It's happening multiple times. And I've thought about, when people are confronting you like that, which I appreciate when people do that because they're telling you the truth as they see it. Like, okay, you're expressing to me a feeling about what you think about the product that I'm producing. So obviously now this is moving much higher to my care factor. But right now, because we worked on it pretty hard, we've worked on messaging it in a variety of different ways. Like Chuck knows, like, hey, if our NCOs don't believe that our product is good, how do we do that? We have NCOs that come here for, ALC, BLC, all these different courses. They have to come back, and warrant officers for that matter. Then you make them meet the language students and our Q course graduates. So you incorporate them, and pretty soon they have to see the product, so they have to believe in the product. They can take part in it. There's going out to groups and talking about the things that you're doing. There's a whole idea of a campaign of how do you talk about what you're doing that I think we did fairly well, right? But I also think customer feedback from First SFC, from group commanders and group CSMs, like soliciting feedback at every opportunity you can about, hey, how are the people that we're producing, how are they doing in your formation? Give me the honest truth. I'd like to know so that if there's something I need to adjust or fix, I will fix it. And it's been good. It's been good lately. Now you can measure this in a lot of different ways too. You can measure it in tab revocations. You can look at the first year folks that are out there, how many of them get put out of the Army? Not very many. They do pretty well. There's lots of different ways of looking at it, and I think on many measures, I think we're doing pretty well. Now, that doesn't mean we can't improve, because I'm always about improvement, but I think we're doing pretty well.
Always room for improvement.
I want to give you an example real quick. So we talked about customer feedback. I would say with the Captain's Career Course, a couple years ago, I was severely disappointed in the products. The quality captains coming out, not that they were good people, but the education. We strayed far away from the newer Captain Career Courses, POI. I think we've re-engaged that, and if you go to our Captain's Career Course right now, it's about as close as you can get to what they teach at Benning without having the combined arms personnel there. But for a while there, we were having officers that would come out, they wouldn't understand basic Army operational terms and graphics, basic use of combined arms maneuver on the battlefield, like your basic stuff, like, hey, this is a fire coordination line, or is this what are you doing here? Is this a coordinated fire line? Like, oh, I don't know, it's just a line. Like, no, this is important, right? But now I try to go over to the Captain's Career Course quite often. The POI right now has, I don't know what you guys did this before I came over, it's been right-sided to the point to where they really concentrate on basic Army planning and execution for the majority of the course, which I think is extremely powerful. So, again, that was back where I would argue that we kind of screwed it up there for a little while. I'm not sure if that was before your point, sir, but whatever you guys did, it's now been right-sized to where I think we're producing a quality product.
I'm not going to say that anybody screwed it up, but I'll give you a couple points on this. Again, within the first few weeks that I took over, I received some not positive feedback from group commanders about the product that we're producing, the Captain's Career Course. And this had been, our Captain's Career Course is probably about 10 years old also. I think it's about 10. Mm-hmm. For a long time, a lot of our officers and many NCOs had complained, the product isn't as good. How could it be as good if you are sending guys here? You're not mixing with the infantry and maneuver folks. So this was something that I knew coming in, and then I got some feedback from some group commanders. So I'm not the most creative person in the world, but I can look around me to my left and right and figure out, okay, well, what do people think is a good product? Oh, the Maneuver Captain's Career Course. I think about things in terms of pacing items. If it's a race, okay, these are the leaders, right? Mm-hmm. This is the Hendrick Motorsport of Captain's Career Courses. So we looked at what they did and we said, okay, we will, copying is not illegal. Copying in the military is, flattery.
It's a form of flattery.
It's flattery. It's flattery. So we copied ruthlessly and said, okay, we've copied. Now at what point can we innovate and at what point can we improve? And I think that we have, at some point the student becomes the master. I'd like to think we're at least the master for ourselves and what we should be teaching our own, Rsop students and any other student from any place that wants to come here. That is my goal.
Mm-hmm. If up to that.
What's that? Chief, you got anything on that one?
Yeah.
Well, I just think that another aspect of things that have morphed in the last 2 to 3 years, for improvement here is also shared in some of the investment that the operational force, has made, right?
Yeah,
And,
great point.
Not that the operational force has always been terrible, but it waxes and wanes as everything does, right? There's times where the force is really focused on who it is that does a tour within SWCS and who doesn't. I think we've been in a period of time where the force has been very acknowledging of, hey, what I invest will pay huge dividends at the end, and it has. So we're all about quality here, and producing quality, assessing for quality, all those sorts of things. But we're also about the quality that comes to work here. Whether you're working in doctrine, you're working as an instructor on a platform, you're out walking a training lane in the field. It takes quality to make quality, and I think the force has done a pretty good job in sharing in that, and owns a portion of that, I think, because they've been pretty good with their investing into the organization. But then it's also been interesting because I was on my second tour here with SWCS when the optimization stuff was first being spoke about and the night letter happened. And the angst that there was about the proposition of changing anything with the SFQ course, let alone anything else that transpired with changes that later came. But the SFQ course, it's remarkably a lot like in its entire structure and execution the way the Q course was when I went through in 1991 and 92. So it's kind of a Back to the Future, sort of thing. It wasn't so much that there was some new thing that transpired and it was going to be executed in a way that had never been done before. And what's going on with the Q course? It was hey, as the CG said, what's probably the optimum period of time, to have a captive trainee student, to be getting trained where they can maintain focus and stay driven without too much distraction. A year seems like it's probably pretty good. When you figure roughly 6 months of that split between all the tactical and MOS stuff and 6 months of that split with the language, a year is probably a pretty good amount of time. That's worked in the past. It's working pretty good right now too. We'll see what the future may bring, because people are always looking for new ways of doing things and how do you adjust something or whatever. But I think right now this is proving to be a pretty good model.
And with that, I think, and the point here being is, if people have feedback, bring it up. But make sure you bring it up in the appropriate way. If you're just bitching, nobody's going to listen to what you're saying. But if you bring it up in the appropriate way, we have all these NCOs that have to come back through the senior leader course. Warrants have to come to the warrant officer courses. Use that as a vehicle to communicate properly. I mean, somebody like me, for example, my bosses are the CSM at the academy, and then the CG is the senior rater, right? So if things are brought up, we do all these writing assignments, articulate it properly, and we will bring it up and have those discussions. It's when you don't bring it up properly that people don't listen to you.
Are you saying we're a learning organization?
We are, but as long as we bring it up properly, and don't stop complaining about stuff. I mean, we're great at complaining about stuff. And
the beer's too cold.
And Rsop, the beer's too cold, the gold's too heavy. But if it's legitimate concerns, bring it up, and don't stop complaining about stuff, especially if it's important and you think it needs to change.
And I'll give you a great example of that. Then I want to double back on Chris's comment about quality from the operational force. But just on that piece, on the language school piece, and the idea is a year enough, one of the things that we were able to do, this is an efficiency gain piece, is people did say, these are students, hey, I'm not getting enough time on my MOS because language is the last piece that I'm doing. I'm losing some of my MOS skills as I'm here during language for 4 to 6 months. Some of the people in the operational force also said, hey, when your guys are getting here, they've forgotten a lot of their MOS skills. So what do? Second training group, greatest problem-solving people on the earth have said, hey, we will do a rebluing program for every MOS. We'll make sure that when they walk out of here, they are reblued. Not just have they done language at the end, they will be doing their MOS along the way. Just a great example of how you solve Chuck's problem of, hey, people have said, hey, give us feedback. You've gotten the feedback. We heard it. We'll try and fix that issue. And I think we've done a lot towards fixing that. I'll also say nothing gets done out there without quality instructors. So we have to thank our operational force, First SFC, for providing those instructors. I couldn't have done the Captain's Career Course piece without guys like Dan Hayes and Carl Forte, intellectually spearheading that with enough initiative and drive. I didn't even have to look over their shoulder. I'm like, here's the idea. You guys come back to me and tell me, what you've got, and bam. I didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about it. They solved those issues for the whole force, which I think is good. And I must say, part of it is I think First SFCs, they're giving us great people. Part of it is I think just in our force right now, we have great people.
We have really good people.
Yeah, we have great people.
So I want to hit on kind of a Swick by the numbers.
Sure.
So for our listeners, I think some of our listeners, and this was me when I first arrived at Swick 2 years ago, I thought Swick was a pretty large entity, but just kind of, and I know, sir, you like to compare things. The Special Warfare Center in schools consists of about 1,400 green suiters or soldiers and just over 600 civilians. So that's really about 2,000 people that work here at the headquarters and across the Special Warfare Center and School enterprise. But to kind of put that in perspective, since August of 2019, so roughly 3 years or 36 months, across the qualification course pipelines, SWCS has produced almost 2,000 civil affairs soldiers across active duty and reserve, 1,500 psychological operations soldiers, and close to 2,800 Special Forces soldiers. And then since August of 2019, in all of our SWCS courses, that's 96 programs of instruction, 96 different training programs that we have here at the headquarters. Close to 45,000 active U.S. Army soldiers have been trained, 3,800 Army National Guard, 3,200 Army Reserve soldiers trained. And then from the Joint Force, though, 981 from our Navy, 620 from the Air Force, 417 Marine Corps, 2 Coast Guard, 187 international students across 55 partner and allied nation countries, and then 41 joint interagency Department of State or other agency civilians have come to our courses. So really that's 57,150 people that have come through those 3 years, touched SWCS in some way, or we've been able to train them to go back out to the operational force or any of our partner nations or across the Joint Force to contribute on behalf of the nation. Pretty substantial.
Hey, real quick, Bob, I just gave you 8 officer points. For one, you said 3 years or 36 months, as if the listeners are too stupid to do the math there. And then with the whole OER bullet you just wrote yourself, 8 officer points. Anyway.
So really, but any given day, so we have 2,000 2,000 employees at the 2-star headquarters here.
That's right.
Or across the United States, where we have people. Any given day, there's about 3,500 students or in-training soldiers currently within our formations. So substantial. So again, going back to that mantra, SWCS, we do more than you think we do. We do a lot. SWCS does a lot more than people think of just the civil affairs, psychological operations, and special forces pipelines.
Sure. Well, I wouldn't call us bloated. And I think if you're not bloated and you're thin, you can probably work rather efficiently. And I think that we do work efficiently. I'm very proud of a lot of our entities do more than one thing, right? They're not just like one-trick ponies. They're doing multiple different pieces, like the LREC piece. I mean, you're doing a lot of the language school, you're managing all the problems for these guys, you're getting them onto their next duty station, hopefully.
Refreshing them for MOS and setting them and their families up for success in their soft careers.
Exactly, with a very small entity, operational cadre that you have. So every one of our companies, our battalions, our groups are kind of like that. They're doing multiple things with not too many folks. And again, to do that requires initiative, an organization that has the right people on the bus. So they operate on intent, because people, I always tell my kids this, like, the people that you want to work for is the guys and gals you can just give intent, and they're going to surprise you with how good they do the job. And that's what we have. And that's why we're able to do, I think, as much as we're doing. I don't want to super pat ourselves on the back, but it is a good model of efficiency. I'd like to do more, and I think some of the courses that we've developed, the courses that we've done, we've had to give up a few things to do that, but I think that's worth doing also.
Now, do you think SWCS right now, sir, is the right size? You said, we're not bloated, but do you think we're the right size right now?
Mm-hmm. I think that we need to be doing a few other things. I think the last 20 years of war, our force got really good at a lot of its core tasks, but in some ways, we also got overly focused on certain things. I'm not going to say too overly focused, because I think it was a net gain, for us, professionalization-wise. We're a better force than we were before the war. But I think in some ways we needed to rebalance. Like, I think the maritime stuff, we had to rebalance that to say, hey, we were only doing, the under-the-water pieces. We probably need to be on the water and even over the water. And how are we operating in that? Because the world's full of water, Asia, South America. We weren't thinking about that enough. But just on another piece of how to rebalance, we don't send as many international students here as we used to send. Because during the war, we went on basically the thought process of, hey, I'm strictly focused on producing as many Americans as I possibly can. And if every international student that I put through here, that's a -1 American. But if you're thinking about like campaigning in a regular warfare way, and what's one of the biggest ways that you can impact the world in time, it would be putting international students through your school. That is the best way. They send their best students here. We give these students a look at, like, this is how U.S. Special Operations works. That impacts them for the rest of their life. So I don't know that I want to increase. I would like to increase that, but it's a matter of, do I get more folks? Do I do it with contract? Do I have to stop something else that I'm doing? We have to figure that out somehow, because I think it's worthwhile to put more international students through our courses.
I mean, I would say it worked well with Ukraine, and we were pushing Ukrainians through for many years.
Yeah. The Ukraine piece helped me to see this, because some things, you just don't wake up in the morning and be like, hey, I got a great idea. No, some things actually help you, and the Ukraine piece helped see the value of that, like, wow, this is really valuable. But then we've had some other folks come through from Asia, and every one of those delegations that comes through here, somebody in that formation that's in the top of that country's defense architecture with their special operations has been to multiple schools that we've been. They talk about the value of the education they got and the value of the friendships and partnerships that they got while they're here. They're usually colonels or generals. And you're getting that. I mean, again, I'm getting feedback from the environment here that tells me this is good and that I need to probably increase this. So
I've been to some places in the not too distant years where you're visiting stuff that our forces are out doing, in some far off place on the planet, and seeing the progress that the force that they're working with and how they're coming along. And to hear commanders of that host nation, be it a colonel or be it a general officer, advocate for the continued relationship with U.S. Special Forces as opposed to another nation's military service, simply because they, at some point in time in their career, had come here and gone through the Special Forces qualification course. And they then were the advocate for, it's USSF that we want training with us as opposed to anyone else. I think it further solidifies relationships and the partnerships we have out there.
I'll also say that getting back to the school, like one of our best TTPs that we have, whether you're a SIPer or a Special Forces guy or Civil Affairs, when we go forward, like you mentioned the Ukraine, Chuck, we built a Swick for the Ukraine. We helped build that. Mm-hmm. We're in Iraq. We built they called it Academia, for the counterterrorist service. In Asia, we have these two. We go forward, we build them schoolhouses that we can help put them through in their own country. But again, I think we can also double down on that by bringing more international students through here.
I heard General Braga also mention that as generational relationships, and that is, the students from a partner nation or foreign country who come through our pipelines, attended the qualification course. Well, they've made friends and relationships with other students that they're going to continue to see throughout the generation of their careers over in theater. And I kind of equate that to, as our partners continue to advance in rank and get up higher and become decision makers within their foreign nation's military, ours are doing the same. And so those close relationships, built around trust, rapport, and a common shared understanding plus shared experiences through SUT, SEER School, the Alpha course, what have you. And so those relationships are critical because we have the opportunity to just pick up the cell phone or reach out via email and talk to those leaders now because we've established those relationships. And those are the partners we'll continue working with now and into the future.
I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think it's a good topic to highlight that a lot of ability that the operational force has out there is not simply resting on the operational force's shoulders alone. Mm-hmm. Right? The generating force, Swick back here, is doing a lot to further, advance and perpetuate the relationships that they enjoy. They're constantly cultivating, ensuring the area command is intact, right? It's because of things that happen here as well by virtue of international service members being able to come here and train here and get educated here and et cetera.
We'll go moving back to the topic of the size of Swick, and this is one of my concerns, and I don't have the data to back up anything that I can present to anybody. I don't even know if the theories are correct.
Swag this. You go ahead.
Yes.
Far away, Chuck.
Yeah.
So my question is, do we have things in Swick that are nice to have and not do we need to have, right? Like certain courses, because the Swick levy does hurt the groups, right? And right now you walk down the hallways, a lot of very young people, not senior people. So that's the question I always ask is, I think the core parts of SWCS are probably the right size, but then
Sure.
do we have these extra courses? And are they really taking away green seaters, or are they mostly civilians?
Yeah.
And just taking an objective look at that and saying, okay, is there fat that we can cut off
Yeah.
to where we're not bringing over people that we don't need?
Yeah.
And obviously I'm a criminal right now against what I'm saying because we just increased the size of BLC and other things, so we did pull more people from the force.
That's right. You
So,
did ask for that.
Yep.
So here's some things that I have looked at some data, not all of it, but you're not the first person that's asked me that, right? So when I think about this, I go to a pacing item, TRADOC, and I say, hey, what is the ratio of student to instructor or student to overhead at these other places like the artillery school, the maneuver school, all these places? We're about half. We're running about half. Those other places are pretty equal. They have about equal, and then there's the Special Warfare Center in school. We're running about half on that ratio.
Because they stick to the 1 to the 16 pretty hardcore, I think.
Yeah, and we're about half of that. So we're really below. Like our drain or draw on our operational force is less than the infantry, artillery, all those kinds of pieces. So that's one way to look at it and say, okay, it's less than what you might think if you were in some other place. And TRADOC's lost folks also from recruiting and all these other areas because they pulled them back to the operational force. They've had the same discussions, and they're like, there's too many of our formations out in the operational force. And by the way, they did pull back, I think, some recruiters that may have hurt them in the recruiting scene too. So there's other ways of thinking about it. Like, you can do this until if something goes wrong on you.
And it's tough too, right? Like when I was Company Sergeant Major's like, I don't want to lose any more people to SWCS. This is stupid. But then obviously I get over the camera, like, hey, sir, I need some more people. But so
the other piece to all this is what you mentioned, like the Army is different in us also, because that's another pacing item, because they said, hey, posts run BLC for a lot of places, not a branch.
Yeah.
We have decided that, hey, it's so important for us to run our own kind of NCO education from top to bottom. We're going to pay that extra price. And if you want to run your NCO education from top to bottom, or your warrant education from top to bottom, you're going to pay a bit more. So we're paying a bit more for that, even though it seems like compared to others we're paying less. But when it hurts to give people up, we're basically saying, I care so much about this, our education, this rebluing, I'm going to pay more to have it internal. It's like private school. We're paying for private school, in a way. And we wanted it that way, and that's what we got, just like the Captain's Career Course. It costs more, but we said, no, it's worth it to me to do this. So
a lot of times the force, and I've been guilty of using the same term too, but it will refer to the SWCS levy, as a tax, right? A tax on the force.
Has it always been called the SWCS levy, by the way? Is that a misconception, or is that
I've heard
a
it called
doctrinal
many
term?
different horrible names, but
SWCS levy in the sense that people are being levied on orders for unit, assignment instructions to SWCS. So
since levy and tax are pejoratives, I suggest we call it the SWCS opportunity.
Which is what I was getting at, as opposed to anyone looking at it as a tax, but more of an investment. Because to add some context, out of the 1,400 uniformed service members that comprise this organization, of the roughly 2,000 that make it up in its entirety, that's still significantly less than just a single operational group, right? Which pushes about 2,600. So when you take 1,400 uniformed service members and you divide that across 5 active duty, they're less than 300 people per group that are coming here. That's not a huge investment, given everything that comes out of SWCS back to the operational force on a continuous basis, whether it's coming out of the pipeline, initial Rsop service members, or people that have come back through advanced skills training, et cetera.
Yeah.
I just think that there's some context everybody has to kind of consider when it comes to people being sent to SWCS for a tour. That's an investment, and we're making a rather small investment when you figure everything that's actually gained out of it.
yeah. And it's an investment for individuals too, because people don't realize it until they get to SWCS most of the time, but they also need a break. And it's not a break from working hard. You're still going to come here and you're going to work hard, but you're going to have that consistency. You'll have the ability to project what your schedule is for almost 3 years that you didn't have in group, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to go over a few other things, because what Chris points out is we have fewer SF, CA, and SIOPs than a group does. Like, third group has almost twice as many SF guys as SWCS does, which is interesting if you think about it. Most people probably would not think that. And then I want to talk about a little bit about, like, what have we had to do over the years? We haven't probably grown in a requisite kind of a way to do the things that we're doing, like an X-ray program. You wouldn't think an X-ray program would require a lot more manpower. It does require a lot more manpower because it's not like people are coming TDY to do your selection. You actually own these people. You own them from cradle to grave. Either they pass, they're going out to the rest of the Army because they didn't pass, or you're going to have to take them and put them out of the Army because they're injured or unfit. That requires a lot of people because on the front end of our pipeline, it takes a lot to make one. Now that we have a PSYOP, X-ray program, and by the way, our PSYOP numbers were, 50% strength. If you think about being at 50 to 60% strength for a decade plus, what's it going to take? It's kind of like a stimulus package. What's it going to take to get PSYOP to 95 or 100%? It took an X-ray program, and now they're on the way. But if you want to be at 100%, you're going to have to pay. That doesn't come free. Yeah. Maybe a little bit comes free in the sense of like creative thinking, but after that, I need more people because now I have an X-ray program.
That's why we needed more cadre at the basic leader course because of the X-ray program for PSYOP.
Exactly, and I think that's these aren't bad things. These are the unintended consequences of progress in some ways. Yes, and are we viciously always thinking about, do I have the right amount of people? Can I do this with less people? I think we are. And as we talked about in the beginning, am I doing things that I don't need to be doing? Yeah, and I think second training group is a great example of like, I'm going to cut things that I'm not doing, or I'm going to reduce things that I'm not doing, either to create more programs or newer programs, or I'm just not going to do it anymore because I don't have enough people. I think the same can be said of the optimized pipeline. Hey, I've got to cut things that I can't do. And it's more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to shift gears just a little bit. There's a lot of terms being thrown around that special operations people or our product are being put against. I was hoping you gentlemen could help us find some clarity through some of the terms. Regular warfare, unconventional warfare, integrated deterrence, and large-scale combat operations. So really what I'm asking is, what are the primary missions we're generating our force for to go out to the operational force to do?
Okay. Well, I think that me and Chris were just talking about this earlier in the sense of where you really, really imprint on a person what their main job is in the culminating exercise, right? Because they're going to remember that culminating exercise probably longer than they remember anything else. So if you think about, I'll just use Rob and Sage as an example of the culminating exercise that we do for Special Forces, because Civil Affairs and PSYOP have adopted a similar culminating exercises for themselves. So I'll just use the Rob and Sage scenario, which we would call an unconventional warfare exercise, but the reality is you could think about it as an irregular warfare exercise or a resistance exercise. I mean, Chris, we were talking about this the other day, but the idea is that we're going in, we're working with a partner. The scenario has been kind of more optimized for integrated deterrence, great power competition. That partner is kind of overrun by some type of the adversary, some other great power, and then we're operating from behind enemy lines with a partner, right? When we're doing everything, we're doing the planning, we're doing the infill, we're doing part of it's a little bit of a FID mission, we're doing the operations in a denied area, then we're going to do the demob at the end also, and then an exfil. But that, I believe, touches on every part of what we want, an Rsop soldier to be able to do. If you think about the unconventional warfare piece, which is very similar to the support to an insurgency or resistance, we're covering that there. The irregular warfare piece, which could be all that I just mentioned, but it could also be foreign internal defense and security force assistance, where I'm going to a country and I'm training that country's host nation military or any other paramilitary or force on how to defend itself, maybe against an internal threat or an external threat, which could be irregular warfare. I mean, all these working with a partner. The best partner, I think First SFC's motto is, the best indigenous partner approach, that type of thing. So I think we're covering a lot of that to make sure that people, when they walk out of here, they know, hey, this is the flavor of what I do. And I don't know if you got anything on that, Chris.
Well, I was just going to say that, when it comes to, we creating forces to conduct, then this short list of things here, irregular warfare, regardless of what anyone like myself may think of the term itself, it's a term given to a bin of things, right?
Catch-all term.
And FID and unconventional warfare and a list of others, are comprised in that bin of irregular warfare. I don't know that you could say, well, we're training forces to do irregular warfare holistically, every one of the things that are within the irregular warfare bin right now. What we do train on are things that are the tenets that you could probably find within any one of those things, right? So, for an SF person, if you're training them to be pretty proficient and efficient and effective in an unconventional warfare construct and having to work with and through a partner to deter, overthrow an occupying power, et cetera, right? Then those same tenets are applicable in foreign and internal defense and security force assistance. And even when it comes to partnering for counterterrorism operations or other DA-centric kind of things, right? That whole working with and through partners is captured, within the training venue that's Robin Sage for SF and
Gray Knight,
Black
Knight,
and
Slush Tiller.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Now, I will say this. Students ask me, hey, is this Robin Sage thing that we're doing, is this applicable? Did you ever use any of this stuff when you're out there? And I will say from our first mission that me and Chris did together, these things to me are 70, 80% exactly like Robin Sage to me, whether it was working with Kurds in northern Iraq in 1996, trying to figure out Bosnian Serb intent, in 98, all the way until I was working with General Mazloum in Syria, in 2019. That was a very serious Robin Sage event. So extremely applicable, without all the definitions. Do I believe that it is the thing that we should be testing and evaluating our students again? Yes, 100%. I think it's very applicable.
I think many of our guests have actually echoed that same sentiment. They've come on and, I ran into this exact same situation during Robin Sage. So it wasn't the first time I got reps at that key leader engagement or developing that partner or, looking at the civil terrain and seeing who my influencers were or how to develop, a target packet. Those were all reps they received in somehow, shape, or form at one of our culmination exercises.
I think
it was applicable in the real world.
To Chief's point, no matter what bin you want to put these in, but I would say that if we broke it down to its lowest common denominator, it produces the ultimate problem solvers that can operate in a true mission command or, a decentralized environment with centralized intent for a lower footprint, low cost, over a longer duration than other soft options, right? That's what we're producing for the force. It's the dirty deeds done dirt cheap. I can take an Rsop, dirty deeds done dirt cheap. I can take an Rsop soldier, give them, hey, this is my centralized intent. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm not going to give you too many resources, right? I need you to go figure this out. And they will figure it out and impress you every single time.
Absolutely.
Adaptive problem solvers, yeah.
So.
Right on.
So, yeah.
Gentlemen, I want to ask you real quick.
Okay.
Really, do you find it difficult working with people like Sergeant Major Ritter? It could have been a very successful male model, but chose a life of service instead.
Well, I'm biased because me and Chuck used to work together before, so I'm going to recuse myself from that question.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, as the command team has really steered the ship for the past 3 years, going through COVID in 2020 into 2021, what did that do for us as Swick? How did that allow us to reflect and see ourselves as an institution? And then what did we do or what did we learn from that?
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned it already. We're producing the most adaptive problem solvers in the world. That's kind of one of our, bumper stickers. I would say that during COVID, our cadre really became the most adaptive problem solvers within the institution because we had to figure out a way to keep going during what I would call a health crisis, really, when a lot of people were kind of stacked arms, I would say. I don't know, stacked arms is too harsh of a term, but they basically went home, isolated. We had to figure out a way to get after it because if you miss, one selection, it's going to cost you 10%. If you miss a Q course, it's probably going to cost you about 30%. And you can't afford those kinds of cuts for very long, or you're not going to be operationally effective. And the way that we approached it, I'll just say this. Guys like Chris and Joe Fancher, we all agreed, first training group, second training group, Stu Ferris, Josh Wright said, hey, we got to keep this train going. And we figured it out. And I have to give a shout out to the medical. We were lucky in the sense that we have a medical training group. So we have an overage of doctors and smart medical folks that were able to figure out hey, testing is the way to do this. If we could test our way out of this in some cases, and how do we do that? How do we keep people in certain bubbles? Before the NFL was doing that, we were doing that. And I think that's a testament to the great folks that we have working for us. It was a leadership challenge, I think, for every one of us to convince our young men and women that it was worth coming to work. It was going to be as safe as we could possibly make it. It's not like combat. In combat, you're risking your life. But I think during that COVID piece, in the beginning particularly, there was, hey, you're not only putting my life at risk, you're putting my family's life at risk. So there's a lot of that to work through. But I think to everybody's credit, we may have missed one selection course during that time. And we figured out what else we could go to distance learning and how that worked. I know some of the stuff that Chuck was doing involved distance learning. I think a lot of the other things that came out of that, and again, we had the vantage point of watching what were other people doing. Other people in the SOF world, whether it was, any sister services, we got to see what the maneuver center was doing. We could take best practices. We could say, no, I can't do that. That's not going to work for me. But at the end of the day, it was all hands on deck for that. And I'll say that we came out of that. This is where the second training group quality first mantra comes in, because they figured out, hey, we can still keep Sephardic and CIFSIC going and all of our MFF courses going. But they said, hey, we're going to have to cut down on the size of the classes by about 25%. And when they did that, they figured out they had higher pass rates, and the students were actually better. They could shoot better. They could get more jumps in. I think you've heard they went from 20 jumps in the same amount of time, 20 jumps at 10,000 feet to 40 jumps at 20,000 feet. And I think that was really, again, you're learning. I'm learning every day about okay, well, what do I want out of this? Or what do we want? What would be the best thing for the operational force? And I think that time early in COVID, you're able to figure out okay, some of this is really we were forced to do it. We had been in a model where we're just jamming as many people into some of these courses as we possibly could, and they were not passing, so it was wasting time and effort. But if we actually were able to get a better student to cadre ratio, we're actually able to get a higher pass rate. That was very similar to the pass rate we had before, but the students that are graduating are much better trained. So I think all that stuff is a really good lesson to come out of COVID for us, both on a perseverance side, problem-solving side, and just really an efficiency side too, and quality.
I think COVID was a phenomenally unanticipated opportunity for this organization to be able to demonstrate, one, that it really is an organization about people. There's a lot of talk across the military and other units where, people first and people matter and all that stuff is said, right? But here, it was demonstrated in that, hey, look, we've got the right kind of people here from the operational force that they themselves want to figure this out. And how do we keep doing what we're supposed to be doing? It wasn't just being driven from leadership of, hey, make this happen. There were people very junior at the lowest level of execution that were how can we keep going? We don't want to stop. Or here's a way we could probably implement something that's going to keep this safe and allow us to continue doing our business, which is providing opportunity to people. Because there was no shortage of folks wanting to come to selection, any one of the selections. It was up to us to figure out, okay, how do we get them? How do we get them here? Ensure they're gotten here safely. Give requisite time for people to be observed and make sure that they don't have any symptoms or illness, and then go out and execute training. So the organization, which is truly about people and giving people the chance to have an opportunity to seize something that they aspire to become, that played out in COVID. We had a chance to really demonstrate that. Demonstrate the kind of people that work here, that come out of the operational force to be, members of Swick for a period of time, but then also to demonstrate that, hey, we're about giving people opportunity to, aspire to other things, regardless of what we're faced with.
Yeah, I think across the board, again, mentioned in Second Special Warfare Training Group in our advanced skills, that quality of the product, we allowed to slow just a little bit so we could fine tune it and get a better quality product that we're getting back out to the operational force, prepared, ready, experienced, more reps in whether it's free fall or down at the combat dive school, and again, which increases the confidence level and that stature as our special operators are getting back on the teams. Now they're more knowledgeable and can share those with their team as well.
Yeah. Something else I was mentioning is where it also became something almost in a forcing function way, but giving us the opportunity to elevate some quality. So military free fall school, just one example of, hey, we're kind of forced to have to figure out how do we do this at a lesser scale, because we've got to maximize safety and can't cram as many people into a course. But since we're going to have fewer people here, we can do more with them while they're here. The level of training, just by virtue of reps and then the things that students could accomplish over the period of time, actually elevated. So I think the quality of a jumper coming out of free fall school, as a basic military free fall parachutist was better than it had been prior to COVID.
Even at the NCO Academy, we're the only academy in the entire Army that we didn't have a drop in student ratio. The only one. But it was the same thing. I think it's a testament to our ability to problem solve without having to be a micromanager, right? Nobody told anybody, hey, this is exactly what you need to do at free fall or whatever. At the NCO Academy, said, hey, we have to maintain these numbers somehow. How do we do it? And the people on the ground figured it out.
Yeah.
Right.
And the interesting thing about that is we gave people the license to fail. Also, we had to stop a few free fall classes because I think being on aircraft really spreads that thing around. But I can remember 2 that we had to stop. We had a SEER school where we got 30 people were infected. I mean, there were some lessons learned here as we went through. I mean, even on the virtual learning thing, we learned okay, for Captain's Career Course stuff where people have to interact and do these group interactions, it doesn't work very well to do it remotely. Mm-hmm. I mean, we know these. I mean, I'm glad we put it all into operation, but there was a lot of rapid prototyping of ideas, and some things worked really well, some things didn't work really well. We learned some great lessons, some not so great lessons, but tough time to go through the COVID piece, but I think it was a great time to learn. And people gave us license to do that too, so I'm appreciative of that also.
The one downside with COVID being over, though, is I'm sure I speak for the entire formation, where everybody misses the new COVID op order every other day that you had to read through.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, that was fun.
I'll miss it. It'll be okay.
Yeah. Okay, so this is one from the audience, because I posed the question, what would people want to know from the Swick CG? So we're in this time, or we're in this build right now where we're looking at changing the Rsop structure somehow, right? I've heard called different things, between the new Rsop task force to convergence to, I don't know technically specifically what the name of it is. Let's talk about your thoughts on that, what it is, and how is that going to affect the force coming up here in the near term and the future?
Yes. So just to put things in context, in time, we have to look at ourselves as coming off, you mentioned this, coming off of 2 wars, both the fight against ISIS and the fight against Taliban. We've kind of shifted. We've shifted in the sense of okay, 2 main competitors that we're looking at, Russia and China. So I think you'd be guilty of negligence if you didn't look at those 2 different problem sets and say, am I optimized in the right way to fight those adversaries or compete with those adversaries, either way. And whether you're looking at Nagorno-Karabakh or the current fight in the Ukraine, I think we're looking at that and saying, hey, are we in the right configuration to take on these adversaries? So I think the idea of looking at what we're doing, that's what you should be doing. You should always be looking and saying, am I optimized to do the things that the nation needs me to do? That's number one. So it's a good idea to take a good hard look at yourself every day and say, am I in the right configuration to do what I need to do? So from the USAJFKSWCS level, first SFC level, even our level, we've gone over some planning groups to look at, it could be the size of the ODA, the AOB, where we're configured in our groups and not. And I think that right now we've got some plans, we've got some options that are out there that some of these planning teams have come forward with. We're going to pilot a few of them. That doesn't mean we're doing them. We're going to pilot them. And while we're piloting them, we're also going to look at some of the implications, we call it .NLPF, like doctrine, organization, material, the people, all that stuff, the schooling that goes into all these things. So I think rapid prototyping, just like we talked about before, is all right. We're not changing everything from top to bottom all at once, which I think is a pretty wise decision. We've thought about scale, hey, maybe it scales low, doesn't scale well high, so we're going to look at that. There might be some considerations to, our formations and how, number of NCOs or officers and how that all works out in the future, because not everything is just about the formation in the fight. If you can't maintain that, if you can't maintain your branch, you got to think about those things too, and we're thinking about them and looking at them. So nothing drastic has been done yet. I think this organization is in good hands, and we're looking at this from every angle, to make sure that, and again, nothing that we're doing is irreversible. How's that? Like when you're piloting something, you can go back to the way that it was.
We're just testing the waters right now, right?
Yeah.
Sir? We're seeing,
We're getting reps.
is this going to work the way we think it might work?
Yeah, exactly. I think if you're in a sport or anything else, you're trying to like, okay, we're going to try this play now. We're going to try this play. We're going to more run, less pass, whatever. We're going to have 3 linebackers, 2 linebackers, 4 down linemen, 5 down linemen. Well, you know, we're trying to do some different looks, different things, and we're seeing if it works. Does that make sense, Chuck?
That's what
It does.
experimentation's all about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know I've heard from multiple people who have talked to General Braga, and he's been flat out like, look, we're going to take everybody's feedback. This isn't like something that we've just decided on. Like we want to know what people's feedback is, and then we'll move on from there. You know, maybe it's not the right choice. Maybe it is, and maybe a lot of us old timers are stuck in our ways, and we're like, okay, change is stupid. But the reality is, if you're not constantly changing, as James Kerr said, it's when you're on top of your game, you still need to change your game. It's not just always when you're down here. You got to jump off, or else you're going to end up on the bottom if you don't do that.
And we all encourage people to give their feedback too, because maybe something looks right from one level, but maybe from another level it doesn't look right.
I was going to say, I think our biases, have to be tested, right? Whether you're biased towards liking the way it's been, or biased towards seeing something new, right? So we experiment, we test a little bit, and find out, hey, is the ideas of some way new really going to be beneficial? Really provide any added capability or not? Maybe it will, and then excellent, we drive on with that. Or the way things have been done, that's absolutely obsolete now, and we need to move on from it. Or actually it's tried and true, and that's where we kind of need to stay grounded with. We don't know that without testing things.
I will also say we've learned this over the last 20 years. There's some technology out there that we need to make sure, I think, that we are incorporating in our formations. And you could take a look at it and say, do I need somebody that's specifically trained who's a 18, 37, or 38 to do this? Or do I hire somebody else that has this technological piece and then I bolt them on to at a SOTIF, and then we can use them on an ODA or an AOB? Or how do I do that? So I think there's a technological piece that's driving a lot of that. We have multi-domain operations if you think about space and cyber. So there's some of that. How are we incorporating those domains into what we're doing? And we're doing some experimentation with that too. And I think you have to do that. That's a good thing to do. You cannot, from a technological perspective, you cannot be a Luddite when you're in this business. You have to be thinking about how do these technologies or domains affect what I'm doing. Robotics, UAS. We've actually developed a course in second training group that's going to incorporate, and we were doing this before any of these OPTs came around, because the feedback from real war is this stuff's important. People are using this, and it is decisive. I can't see it being less decisive in the future, and how we incorporate that into our formation is a big, big deal, both robotics and UAS.
For our listeners, I think that's a great way to describe it, is, are we adding organic capabilities to the Rsop structure, or are we allowing our Rsop members a better understanding of what those bolt-on attributes or those bolt-on capabilities are and how to work with them, but they're only being bolted on for certain entities. They're being task organized.
Well, one thing we're definitely doing, because we are running the course, is we are going to give SOP operators those capabilities. Now, I think what we have to figure out, and we've talked about maybe a new warrant officer, MOS, we haven't exactly decided how we're going to do this, but there are people out there that have certain capabilities, and we're thinking about how we're going to incorporate them. And there's lots of different variations, like skill identifiers, new MOSs, new warrant officer pieces. So I think we're still looking at that. But I will say this, we got a course that's going to start, I think it's next month, that goes through a lot of this. And then, again, rapid prototyping in the sense of just like we do with all of our courses. Is that what the operational force needed? Is there more? I'm sure there is more to this. How much more do we want? How much more do we want to teach in this course? And I think that we're still, what capabilities do I rent? What capabilities do I buy or own? How much overhead is involved in owning, versus renting? I think we're still a little bit in the mix with that. Can I actually have a guy that's an 18 that is so immersed in this stuff that that's the only thing that he does, right? So we're still working through some of that. But I do know this, we need much of this capability. How we go about having the capability, we're going to sort that out. But you wouldn't want to go to war without these things.
I would say even as we evolve and however this convergence adds up, and this is kind of the Chief's point earlier, the capability of the force in the past to now is what people are capable of right now in special operations is phenomenal. It's impressive. Like we could have never done half the stuff these guys can do. They're smarter, they're in better physical condition, and their capabilities with tech and everything else is just phenomenal. It's almost intimidating when you go into a team room now and look at what they can do.
Yeah. So when I first, in 2003, 2002, I got to go into Iraq, I wouldn't have known what UAS was if you'd have put it on a whiteboard for me and drew pictures. I would not have quite really understood that. I would have understood a helicopter flying over and telling you what they're seeing, or a plane. I would have got that. But fast forward ahead, in 2013, in the siege of Sodef that me and Chuck were in, we were killing people with Hellfires from UASs. That was something that we had not done. So other units had done that, but we were not too far behind any of the other units. That was something that was pretty new at that time, and we were doing it.
True innovation.
From an 06 headquarters. Fast forward to when I'm a SWCS commander in Iraq and Syria, we're doing that every day. Team leaders are not going out of their base without knowing I've got 3 or 4 things flying above me. I'm looking at JTACs that are controlling, the visuals for an F-16, a B-1, a Predator, and a handheld UAS at the same time. That's a pretty big kind of a transition in time. And I like to think about that because when we first went in, you didn't know what was over the next hill unless you went over the next hill. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was almost like Vietnam in a way. It was that kind of technology. Fast forward, it had radically changed. You wouldn't do a raid without having 3 or 4 pieces of ISR and an AC-130 looking at that place before you went to it.
So, your sensor plan was almost an entire MDMP process in itself, just to, because that's what you had available. And half the time you could I've got so much stuff that I can't use it all right now, and then you go back to the archaic days of 2003, none of that existed.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about and then you have to say, I have to somehow institutionalize some of this stuff that we've been doing. Mm-hmm. The amount of fires that you can put on a target, that wasn't something that we were doing before.
So we added the ground force commanders part to the 18 Alpha course,
exactly.
Which I think was a very smart move.
The conundrum, I think, though, is also preparing people to not only think about and be aware of those assets and the technology that's there and how to integrate it and employ it, et cetera, but is also ensure that they're capable of operating and executing their mission when they can't have that stuff, when it's not available, because the peer you're competing against, has a way of interdicting it.
As we saw in Syria, they're just always jamming us.
Right. So if we're in a big fight against a peer, is there even going to be UAS friendly anyway above us to help?
We're still going to be capable to do all your basic principles of combined arms maneuver and operate without technology, and it's be able to operate with technology at the same time.
That's the conundrum, I think, when it comes to how much do you pack in the proverbial rucksack, that is the brain housing group when it comes to training and educating people for.
My perspective on that, which is a great point, Chris, is what I've seen a lot of SF ODAs, their biggest sin is they don't know what's out there. So when they're doing a mission, they didn't ask for something. Could have been a space asset. My quest is not that because I've seen other teams price themselves out of missions no, you're not getting that. You're not getting the AC-130 tonight. You're going to have to go without that. Or we don't have 3 pieces of ISR for you to look at. But I think what we should teaching people is this is what's out there. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're going to get nothing because everything is jammed, just like Chuck was talking about. You got to know how to do the basics, but you should know hey, these capabilities are out there to incorporate and use if needed. Because if you don't, what I've seen is you'll get in trouble and you're why didn't they have X? Because they didn't know to ask for X.
Well, absolutely right, sir. I just also believe they have to be armed, from a confidence standpoint as well as a knowledge and understanding standpoint to be able to execute when it's not given or it's not available.
Absolutely.
Et cetera.
Shifting gears a little bit, each of you has spent time going through the course that you're now portions of Swick. Talked a little bit about Rob and Sage or your experiences in Pineland. Might you guys have any stories or any fun kind of vignettes or anything that stands out that you recall from your time deploying to Pineland while you were here at Swick as a student?
First of all, I'm going to say that the scenario when I went through now it's a ton better. Our formation is just a lot better than it was then. But if you want a funny story, I'll tell you a funny story. When we did it, we brought live pigs and chickens and rabbits, and that's what we could eat. And one of I remember, you're starving out there because you're always walking around and everything. And at one of our final missions, we were gonna have a pig roast, and somebody brought a live pig out there, and one of our instructors had a pistol, and he was going to shoot this pig, and it was like a .45, and he put the gun up to the pig's head, his forehead, shot the pig, and the pig just ran off. And we lost the pig. I did not get to eat for the next 2 days. Yes.
And the cadre are probably just very amused.
I think they were like, it was crazy because first of all, wow, that pig just took that bullet and it must just bounced off his skull. And then it's like, and there's no more food. This is horrible.
Oh man, bacon's gone.
Yeah, because when you're hungry and that happens to you, it's horrible. That pig was just squealing and just ran away. Wow.
So you probably had nightmares about that incident.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy.
As we wrap up, any closing comments you might have for our listeners, or any words of advice for officers or NCOs contemplating selection or within our pipeline today here at Swick?
Well, first of all, I'd just say that this has been a fantastic, meaningful job. And I've had a lot of great jobs. I mean, I've got to work with guys like Chuck, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Bosnia, all over the place. But this has been extremely meaningful, challenging. Every day I got up, wanting to come to work, wanting to solve problems, and I've enjoyed it thoroughly. And I'm sad that it's ending, but that's just the way that it goes. And Chairman Beaupere will do a fantastic job. I'll tell anybody out there that's listening that's thinking about coming into Rsop, good decision. Your better decision would be getting into the pipeline and sorting it out. Best decision that I ever made. I haven't looked back. It's been fantastic. Been challenging. It's been hard, but there's, when I look back at the things that I've got to do, in behalf of our nation, I mean, it's phenomenal. So.
And Chief Frazier, I just wanted to ask any other kind of closing thoughts or comments you might have to our young officers, non-commissioned officers, and warrant officers out there in the force, either contemplating coming to SWCS through one of our pathways or coming to work at SWCS, or just any advice you might have for our group.
Yeah, so I'll start with saying that out of the 34 years now that I've got in service, 29 of that has been affiliated with Rsop in some fashion. First couple of years, obviously, training myself to then get to an SF group, and then a career with the 10th Special Forces Group. Sprinkled in there have been 3 tours now here at this organization. So the time has gone extremely fast. In no way, shape, or form seems like it's been 34 years, and it's been a lot of fun. Yes, are there low points when you have people that you work with on a daily basis or that you're really close with that are severely injured or no longer with us and those kinds of things? Absolutely. That's the very unfortunate byproduct of the business. But by and large, extremely enjoyable, very fulfilling. So anyone that thinks it's something that seems interesting to them, I would certainly encourage and have encouraged, give it a shot. If you're somebody that's looking to always do something more, do something new, that kind of thing, then absolutely give this a shot. And I'm an SF guy. I'm always certainly be a proponent for advocating people to try SF. But there's certainly a couple other career fields where you can be a part of this huge Rsop team and do some other things that are different in the civil affairs side with governance and the psychological operations side in the influence realm. Great opportunities in those as well. So absolutely encourage people to give it a shot. As far as working at this organization and anyone that may be faced with a tour here or curious about a tour here, I would say absolutely. You can come here and learn a lot yourself. You can refine and hone a lot of knowledge and skills by virtue of being an instructor here, or even folks that are working in our doctrine section, right? I mean, what a better way to get yourself deeply immersed in understanding doctrine, than working there, writing it and revising it, et cetera. Because, and I say all that, out of all 3 of my tours here, it's always been clearly apparent to me the degree of job satisfaction that one can have. Commensurate in saying that is, it's all about what you put into it as well, right? You're going to get out of something commensurate to what you put into it. But the level of job satisfaction is immense. And I would gladly argue with anyone that there is not likely a place that you can be assigned and as an individual have the same degree of impact as you can here. My change of responsibility remarks last week, I spoke to this about how I think that to the individual, impact is global. Whether it's internationals that come here and get trained, or it's all the folks that are going through training who then go to a unit that deploys somewhere around the world, they've all come through training here. So our instructors They're instructing people that are going around the world. Our doctrine writers are revising and writing and developing new doctrine that goes out to the force that are going all around the world, right? You can be an individual and work here and have global impact, not just regional or theater impact. And for all of us to talk about, we're in the people business, and we work with regards to sort of a human-centric focus in our mission. This place is absolutely about people, and I mentioned earlier, we give people opportunity to excel. Again, it's very rewarding, and I would encourage anybody to give it a shot.
Chief, well put. Great remarks. Chuck, anything else you want to kind of wrap up with?
Yeah, actually, I do want to end it with this. We talked to two people that are leaving the top positions in the Special Warfare Command. I used to do exactly what I'm about to tell everybody not to do, right? When you're down at the team level, there's lots of things that you think are dumb or they need to be changed. And, I was one of those guys that was always complaining about what was wrong. And a lot of your complaints are valid, but I'll say this. I'm not saying stop doing that because we all do it and it's healthy. But people will listen if you bring things up in the appropriate way. So I'm a host on Pineland Underground. You have our email. We put it out at the end of every podcast. Email it. If you have a problem, email me, and I will bring that up. We'll have a discussion, and we'll bring it up to the powers that be, if it's a legitimate concern. But I would say if I could go back in time, I would have tried to figure out how to message things better to where people would actually listen to what I was saying, because people don't listen to you if you're just complaining. But with all of this, as we're talking about, generally these generals will listen to what you have to say if you can walk the dog and bring the mat to them and show them what you're talking about. 100% of the time, every time I brought something up to General Roberson when he was a CG at Swick and walked the dog, said, hey, I need an extra $100,000, or we need more people, or we need this, or I need to change this. As long as we showed him the math and we articulated it in the proper way, we got everything we ever wanted, but also taking the time to understand the rules and everything that we needed to give him the ability to also give that to us. That's what I'm saying to close out. We're just here with Chief Warrant Officer and the CG of the Special Warfare Training Center, and people have a lot of bitches, gripes, complaints about different things. It's fine. Package them up. Message it up. At a minimum, let's have a discussion about it.
No, that's well put, Chuck. I think a way to kind of just capture that too is, again, people are driven. Leaders are driven. The people in this organization are driven to improve the organization for the betterment of the people and our profession. So any changes that do occur, there's always a why behind it.
And sometimes we're just in the Army. Sometimes you're going to bring it up and you're going to be told to shut up. That's fine. It's part of you look down to your left like, oh, shit, I'm in the Army. It's just what it is, right? But you can at least message it, and you message it properly. People are probably going to listen to you.
Yeah. And there's a purpose behind it, and there's a lot of thought and counsel that's gone into it. So we have the outgoing Swick command team whose message that has been transparent about it, has really taken that input and feedback from the force and wants to hear that. Because when they make decisions to change things for the better, they want to make sure that it is, messaged correctly, but also it is going to make our formations, our people, a way of doing things, and our production and a quality of product still going to be better. Always keep getting better, right?
Yeah.
All right.
The last thing is you did accrue 10 officer points. I forgot to bring the emergency clown nose. The new SOP is if you accrue 10 officer points during an episode, that person has to wear the emergency clown nose. I forgot to bring it today. But I will purchase more, and they will be on standby at all times in the podcast bag. Well,
congratulations, Chuck. So far, Major General Roberson has not fired me. So we'll see how that goes with the new Swick command team. But Major General Patrick Roberson, Chief Warrant Officer 5, Chris Frazier, fantastic having you guys here in Pineland Underground. Really appreciate the time, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us today in Pineland Underground, the U.S. Army John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and Schools official podcast.
Please tune in to our next episode. We release episodes every 2 weeks.
You can reach us at pinelandunderground@gmail.com. Check it out.